Hello, this is Kaylia in 2020. What you are about to hear is the remastered version of the episode that you clicked on. Why? Well, it turns out that when I started this podcast, I got some incorrect information regarding copyright law and fair use policy. After nearly 2 years of making content, this oversight was brought to my attention. There was mild panic, lots of guilt, and then a few fervent nights doing research. It seems we might exist in this gray, nebulous area of fair use for critique and commentary, and thus our use of a teeny tiny bit of the music from the soundtracks of the movies that we are critiquing and commenting on might be allowable. But then again, it might not. So a few things. 1, I don't want to be a jerk, even accidentally. 2, I think it's important to acknowledge when you mess up. But 3, and this is key, I think acknowledging your mess up isn't enough. You have to rectify the situation if possible. And guess what? It's totally possible to go back into these old episodes and clip out the maybe illegal, maybe just slightly crappy bit of audio and replace it with a bit of music created just for me by the same composer and performer who made us our theme music. Which is what I'm going to do. And since I can't help but tinker just a smidge, I might clean up a teeny tiny bit of audio noise while I'm in there. I mean, I've learned a lot over the last 2 years, and who knows, you might be stumbling upon this podcast feed years from now. So why should your present-day ears be punished because way back in time, I hadn't yet found the noise reduction button? Anyway, without further ado, here is the podcast you came here for, just slightly better. Thanks for listening.
It's the Pages of Popcorn podcast. Jennifer and Kaylia will edify. It's the Pages of Popcorn podcast. Jennifer and Kaylia are gonna talk, so you'd better damn well listen.
Hello and welcome to the Pages and Popcorn podcast, the podcast where we,
Jennifer,
and Kaylia, 2 book nerds, talk about movies based on books as well as the original source material.
Today we will be discussing Silence of the Lambs, which was a 1988 novel by Thomas Harris and was adapted for the big screen in 1991.
But first we're going to tell you all the ways that you can connect with us on the internet.
As you know, we have a webpage where you can find sources, references, and updates about the show.
You can also connect to us via our Facebook page or our Twitter, both searchable by typing Pages and Popcorn Podcast into your search bar. We now have weekly polls about our episodes on Facebook and Twitter, so check them out and make your opinions known.
And of course, you can email us directly at pagesandpopcornpodcast@gmail.com.
We want to thank all of our patrons for their continued support and remind you that our Patreon page is www.patreon.com/pagesandpopcornpodcast. You're welcome to support us and the podcast for as little as $1 a month. A tiny little bit of support helps us keep making these wonderful podcasts. So head on over to our Patreon page and sign up. Again, it's patreon.com/pagesandpopcornpodcast.
And we want to really encourage you to rate and review us on whatever platform you listen to us on, especially iTunes, because that will help other people find us. Now, on with the show.
So I'm going to be doing our book and movie recap. You picked this, so do you want to say something about that, or do you want to wait until after my recap?
I watched it when it first came out, so I guess I was a little too young to see it, but it was one of my mom's favorites for a while. And then I read the book when I was in Greece, of all places.
Oh.
Yeah. It was one of those books that when you do a lot of traveling, sometimes hostels will have like the little library, and so I just grabbed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
A choice of convenience rather than...
Well, I liked the movie, and so I was interested in the book, and at the time, I'll save it for later. I was a little disappointed when I reread the book. I had a different opinion.
Oh, okay. Well, I saw the movie years ago because somebody I was with told me it was canon and I needed to watch it. So we watched it, and then you put the book on our list, so I read the book, and then I watched it again. So here we go.
Slightly accused here.
Book recap. Clarice Starling is a young FBI trainee. She's asked to carry out an errand by Jack Crawford, the head of the FBI division that draws up psychological profiles of serial killers. Starling is to present a questionnaire to the brilliant forensic psychiatrist and cannibalistic serial killer Hannibal Lecter. Lecter is serving 9 consecutive life sentences in a mental institution for a series of murders. Crawford's real intention, however, is to try to solicit Lecter's assistance in the hunt for a serial killer who has been dubbed Buffalo Bill.
The modus operandi of Buffalo Bill involves kidnapping overweight women, starving them for up to 2 weeks, killing and skinning them, and then dumping their remains in nearby rivers. The nickname was started in Kansas City Homicide as a sick joke because he likes to skin his humps. At the asylum, we meet Dr. Frederick Chilton, the asylum's administrator and Lecter's self-styled nemesis. Starling is at first unable to get much from Lecter, but she does get accosted by another inmate who lobs semen at her face. Over the course of the novel, we get a lot of administration stuff, details about how the FBI investigates and how hard it is for Starling to keep up with her studies while helping the investigation. Remember, she's still a student. We also get her roommate Mag and some other stuff about Starling being a really good shot and respected by her teachers, but we aren't really here for that. No, we're here for Lecter. Lecter, by the way, has given Starling a clue about an old case, which leads her to a storage unit, a dark, mice-infested storage unit with a door that won't open all the way, and of course there's rain, and it's all mysterious, and she climbs inside, and there's a car, and in the car there's a mannequin with a dead guy's head in a jar. Lecter also convinces the semen-tossing inmate to kill himself. So, there's that. As the novel progresses, Starling periodically returns to Lecter in search of information, and the two form a strange relationship, in which he offers her cryptic clues in return for information about her troubled and bleak childhood as an orphan, and her time on a ranch. Also, there is so much misogyny I gave up counting. Starling hates it, knows it's part of the life as a female FBI agent, but still hates it, and is not afraid to call people on it in the right time and place. Anyways, Buffalo Bill's next victim is found in West Virginia. Starling helps Crawford perform an autopsy on the body, and Starling finds a pupa in the throat of the victim. Just as Lecter had predicted, the victim has also been scalped. Lecter's also said that Bill is obviously needing a vest with tits. Gag. Triangular patches of skin have also been taken from the shoulders of the victim. Furthermore, the autopsy reports indicate that Bill had killed her within 4 days of her capture, much faster than his earlier victims. Starling takes the pupa to the Smithsonian. She meets a couple of not doctor PhDs, where it's eventually identified as the black witch moth, a species that does not naturally occur where the victim was found. On the basis of Lecter's prediction, Starling believes that he knows who Buffalo Bill really is. She asks Crawford why she was sent to fish for information on Buffalo Bill without being told that she was doing so, and Crawford explains that if she'd had an agenda, Lecter would have sensed it and never spoken to her. In Tennessee, Catherine Baker Martin, the daughter of a senator, Ruth Martin, is kidnapped. Within 6 hours, her blouse is found on the roadside, slit up the back, which is Buffalo Bill's calling card. Crawford estimates that they have 3 days before Catherine is killed. Starling is sent to Lecter with the offer of a deal. If he assists in Catherine's rescue and Buffalo Bill's capture, he will be transferred out of the asylum, something he's continually longed for. Lecter expresses skepticism at the generousness of the offer. After Starling leaves, Lecter reminisces about his past and recalls a conversation with his former patient, Benjamin Raspail, a former patient he had eventually murdered. During the therapy sessions, Raspail had told Lecter about his former lover, James Gum, who Raspail had left Gum and began dating a sailor named Klaus, and Gum had become jealous and murdered Klaus, using his skin to make an apron. Raspail also believed that Gum had an epiphany while watching a moth hatch. So anyways, this is all happening in Lecter's memory palace, and Lecter's ruminations are interrupted because Dr. Frederick Chilton, remember him, the guy from before? He steps in. Apparently, he planted a listening device and has allowed him to record Starling's offer. Chilton has found out that Crawford's deal is all a lie. He offers one of his own. If Lecter reveals Buffalo's true identity to Chilton, he will indeed get a transfer to another asylum, and Chilton will get credit for getting this information out of him. Lecter agrees, but insists that he be allowed to give the information to Senator Martin in person in Tennessee. Unknown to Chilton, but to the reader, Lecter has secretly collected the ingredients for an improvised handcuff lockpick he deduces will be useful at some point during the travel. In Tennessee, Lecter toys with Senator Martin briefly, enjoying the woman's anguish, but eventually gives her some information about Buffalo Bill. He says that his name is William Billy Rubin, and he has suffered from elephant ivory anthrax, a knife maker's disease. He also provides an accurate physical description. The name, however, is a red herring. Billy Rubin is a pigment in human bile and a chief coloring agent in human feces, which the forensic lab compares to the color of Chilton's hair. Okay, Starling tries one last time to get information from Lecter as he is held in police custody. He offers a final clue. We covet what we see every day, and then demands to hear her worst memory. Starling reveals that after her father's death, she was sent to live with a cousin on a sheep and horse ranch. One night, she discovered the farmer slaughtering the spring lambs and fled in terror with a mare also destined for the slaughterhouse, whom she named Hannah. They didn't get very far, and she and the horse were sent to live on an orphanage when they spent the rest of their childhood, or her childhood and the horse's life. Lecter, seeing the parallels between the helpless lambs and the equally helpless Catherine, thanks her for her candor, and the two share a brief moment of connection before Chilton forces her to leave. Shortly after this, Lecter escapes by killing and eviscerating his guards, using one of their faces as a mask in order to fool the paramedics. In Buffalo Bill's basement, Catherine is trying to escape by tricking the much-loved little pet dog of Bill into her prison cell to use as a bargaining chip. She knows who has her, and he wants her skin. She's understandably terrified. Bill, for his part, is getting ready to kill her soonish, and is preparing by watching old movies of his mother, a beauty pageant contestant. Starling continues her search for Buffalo Bill, deducing that he knew his first victim, Frederica Bimmel, from everyday life. Frederica Bimmel from everyday life. She visits Frederica's family home and discovers that both she and Buffalo Bill were accomplished tailors. Catherine has managed to get the dog to fall into her well and is threatening to kill it unless Bill gives her a phone, and he's pretty frantic, but he decides to shoot her in the head and give up on collecting her hair as part of his project. Meanwhile, by canvassing Bimmel's known associates, Starling ends up at the house of one James Gum, a dressmaker and a leather worker. She spies a black witch moth in his home, and then she knows whom she's really found. However, Gum also knows that he knows what he knows. And he escapes into his basement. Starling, armed only with a revolver, but aware that calling for backup will result in Catherine's death, follows him down and kills him after a protracted chase. Catherine is returned to her family with the dog unharmed. Starling receives a congratulatory telegram from Lecter, who hopes that the lambs have stopped screaming and indicates that he has no plans to pursue her. He also predicts correctly that saving Catherine Martin may have granted Clarice some relief, but that the silence will never become eternal, heralding her motives for a continued career at the FBI. Clarice eventually finds rest, even after Lecter's letter, sleeping peacefully in the silence of the lambs. The end. Okay, so the movie, directed by Jonathan Demme, from a screenplay written by Ted Talley, stars Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins. The film was very similar. Okay, so a lot of this is the same. But I punched up the thing just to make it a little bit more interesting to listen to. Again, FBI trainee Clarice Starling is pulled from her training at the FBI Academy, again by Jack Crawford, the Bureau's Behavioral Science Unit. He assigns her to interview Hannibal Lecter, a former psychiatrist and incarcerated cannibalistic serial killer whose insight might prove useful in the pursuit of a serial killer named Buffalo Bill, who skins his female victims' corpses. Starling travels to the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where she's led by Frederick Chilton to Lecter's solitary quarters. Although initially pleasant and courteous, Lecter grows impatient with Starling's attempts at dissecting him and rebuffs her. As she's leaving, one of the prisoners flicks semen on her face. Lecter, who considers this act unspeakably ugly, calls Starling back and asks her to seek out an old patient of his. This leads her to a storage shed where she discovers a man's severed head with a sphinx moth lodged in his throat. She returns to Lecter, who tells her that the man is linked to Buffalo Bill. He offers to profile Buffalo Bill on the condition that he may be transferred away from Chilton, whom he detests. Another victim is found. Starling performs the autopsy, finds the moth in the throat, takes it to the Smithsonian for clarification, yada yada yada. Buffalo Bill abducts the senator's daughter. Crawford authorizes Starling to offer Lecter a fake deal, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Buffalo Bill. Okay, instead, Lecter demands a quid pro quo from Starling, offering clues about Buffalo Bill in exchange for personal information. Starling tells Lecter about the murder of her father when she was 10 years old. Chilton has secretly recorded the conversation and reveals Starling's deceit, and then he offers Lecter his own deal. Lecter agrees, flown to Memphis, verbally torments the senator, gives her misleading information on Buffalo Bill, including the name Louis Friend. Starling notices that Louis Friend is an anagram for iron sulfate, which is fool's gold. Okay. She visits Lecter, who's now being held in a cage-like cell in a Tennessee courthouse. The lighting is very creepy, and she asks for the truth, and Lecter tells her that all the information she needs is contained in the case file. Rather than give her the real name, he insists that they continue their quid pro quo, and she recounts a traumatic childhood incident where she was, once again, awakened by the sound of spring lambs being slaughtered on a relative's farm in Montana. Starling admits that she still sometimes wakes thinking she can hear the lambs screaming, and Lecter speculates that she is motivated to save Catherine in the hope that it will end the nightmare. Lecter gives her back the case files on Buffalo Bill after their conversation is interrupted by Chilton and the police, who escort Clarice from the building. Later that evening, Lecter kills his guards, escapes from his cell, again by using the face of one of his victims to trick the EMTs, and disappears. Starling analyzes Lecter's annotations in the case file, realizes that Buffalo Bill knew his first victim personally. Starling travels to the victim's hometown and discovers that Buffalo Bill was a tailor with dresses and dress patterns identical to the patches of skin removed from each of the victims. She telephones Crawford to inform him that Buffalo Bill is trying to form a woman's suit out of real skin. Crawford's already en route to make an arrest, having cross-referenced Lecter's notes with hospital archives and finding a transsexual woman named Jane Gum who once applied unsuccessfully for a sex change operation. Starling continues interviewing friends of Buffalo Bill's first victim in Ohio, while Crawford leads an FBI team to Gum's address in Illinois, but the house in Illinois is empty. Starling is led to the house of Jack Gordon, who she realizes is actually Jane Gum, again by finding a Sphinx moth. She pursues him into his multi-room basement, where she discovers that Catherine is still alive, and yes, has the little dog, because Catherine is a vamp in both versions. Whatever, Catherine's in the well. After turning off the basement light, Gum stalks Starling in the dark with night vision goggles, but gives his position away when he cocks his revolver. Starling reacts just in time, fires all her rounds, killing Gum. Sometime later, the FBI Academy graduation has a party, and Starling receives a phone call from Lecter. He assures her he does not plan to pursue her, asks her to return the favor, which she says she cannot do. Lecter then hangs up the phone, saying that he is having an old friend for dinner, and starts following a newly arrived Chilton before disappearing into the crowd. There will obviously be a sequel. So I guess we could start by saying this was book 2 in a series. They'd already made a movie of the first one. It was not well received. Then they made this one. Then they remade the first movie later, which was much better received. And then they made the third book in the series. So yes, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, the first movie was really terrible. At certain points, you can actually see the boom mic going into the screen. It was just poorly half-assed done.
Yes. I've seen parts of it. So, okay.
Go ahead, because you're kind of chomping at the bit.
No, I have a list. We always have a list.
All right.
Do you want to talk, though? I just did a whole bunch of words.
Let's see. So,
do you want to talk about similarities and differences, since there's
not really all that much that's different. They took out a couple of the side plots. So one of the things in the novel is Jack Crawford, who is based on John Douglas, who's the actual head of the FBI profiling team. His wife is dying, and so he's sort of taken out just by that emotionally, but there's hints here and there that he and Clarice may not. There's a lot of speculation by other characters, including Crawford, that they have a romantic relationship or will.
No, it's a father-daughter relationship.
It is.
Crawford.
Chilton.
Well, okay. We'll save that. So, yes, they took out a lot of Crawford's side plot about his wife died, but they also took out his reference to the first book where William Graham had encountered Hannibal Lecter and had been disfigured and blah, blah, blah. And that lends a lot into Crawford's character. Crawford was very protective of Clarice. He's trying to basically even the score, but, make amends for past things. He's protective of her. He definitely has a father relationship with her. That's all missing from the movie completely. But I did not get any kind. People superimpose their own weird desires for Clarice on that, but that's not actually.
No, Chilton is a genuine creep in this.
Yeah, he straight up propositions Clarice when she first shows up at the office.
And they showed that in the movie pretty well. He's even smarmier in the movie. He's pretty smarmy in the book, but he's the one who has that speculation. So Crawford's wife is dying. That's where his emotions are. It's just interesting how much... I thought this is actually fairly well done, especially considering it's a male writer, and male writers don't always do this well, is portraying a woman who doesn't really care about romance. She's all about her career at this point. She's about service. And she has to deal with a lot of men's issues.
Yes, misogyny is a major theme here. And for all intents and purposes, this is a feminist novel in some ways, because she's not interested in the stereotypical female role of the nurturer and whatnot. No, she's going to solve the case. She's really, in the book, they make a point of talking about how she's really good at what she does. She's very, very smart. She's one of the best marksmen or shooters or whatever. There's a whole section about her with the guns. She's awesome. In the movie, she didn't come across quite as competent, I felt like. She fumbles for her gun towards the end. She kind of reacts to a lot of stuff, but because we're not in her brain, we're not seeing how she's putting things together, and we don't see her rage and her frustration always. Like when the guy flicks the stuff on her, she, is, horrified, but in the book, we get her actually cursing and wishing that could happen to Chilton. You know what I mean?
She's much more self-contained in the movie.
Yeah, she feels toned down to me in the movie, and just not quite as fully fleshed out. So that was a pretty good size change, I felt like.
According to Jodie Foster, a lot of her character information is she wanted a female hero's journey. That was important to her, and specifically female. She's not a masculinized woman. So that was a big part of it, is she's fit and she can do these things, but she's not Barbarella. She's not barbed wire. She's not one of those masculinized women.
Yeah, I okay.
Well, that happens a lot when you have a female in like a lead role like this. So if you look at Aliens...
Right. No, they definitely... And I think they actually... I don't know, because in the book, she seemed more feminine than in the movie. So I feel like they almost defeminized... Like in the book, her hair was much longer. Mm. They talked a lot about how beautiful she was. She was beautiful. Now, Jodie Foster is a very good-looking woman, but she has a very strong jawline. She's a handsome lady, for sure. And, but she was not I would say the book, she was more feminine, even though as she was fighting against a lot of misogyny. In the book, or in the movie, they did the shorthand of having her get in an elevator wearing her workout clothes and being the super short person surrounded by all these tall guys who are wearing different colors. So she's in gray, they're all in orange, she's obviously different. And they took out her roommate. So she was like literally the only woman, except for the victim. So they're definitely painting that as like there's this woman's the victim, and then this woman is the FBI agent. In the book, there was room for other types of femininity. So I would say that the book is way more feminist than the movie, even though what you're saying is accurate about Jodie Foster's picture.
It is, and it's sort of an interesting thing here. All the victims, all these women are very derogatorily displayed.
Displayed?
Yeah, the way people talk about them.
Discussed.
Yeah. Well, even the way they're displayed. It's
they're all just dropped in the river.
Yeah, but it's a question of when you're doing this kind of film, when you're doing this kind of show or entertainment, do you focus on the serial killer and do you glamorize the serial killer, or do you talk about the victims? Which one has higher prominence? In the book, there was more discussion because we're in Clarice's head, and she talks about how difficult it is to deal with a body when it's found in nature, because you don't see all the parts of their life that's around them. You don't see abused children. You don't see all this ugly stuff that might color your information about them. It's just a victim. It's just this sad body. So there's a little bit more sympathy given to the victims in the novel, whereas in the movie, they're just big women.
Yes. Then their bigness was discussed in the novel quite a bit, but in the movie, we hardly see the victim who had died. We see there's one real quick shot, and she's face down, and it's brought back. In the book, there's a lot more detail talking about her hands and the jaw and the this and these body parts and stuff like that. So it's more detailed. But I think that they made a good choice in the movie by changing that perspective. That scene of her doing the autopsy in the movie, and in the book actually, but in the movie too, is very well done because they're not showing you. So in that case, it's what they're not showing you. The camera's not lingering over all these body parts. We've got some lingering shots of the newspaper clippings, but that's not where the gore is in this movie. The gore is all saved for Hannibal's stuff.
It's all it's not explicit. Most of the gore is not explicit. It's all in your head.
Until we get to Hannibal.
True.
Okay.
But they're considering that it's a thriller, there's actually not that much violence considering the average thriller. There's one or two scenes. Most of it's just hinted at, here's a photo that you don't see, and we'll give a description of a nurse. You fill in that.
Yeah. Definitely built tone and atmosphere. And like I said, by showing you some things and not showing you other things.
So part of Clarice, I'll grant you that she is more feminine in the book. It's just when you don't have the character's internal thoughts, you do have to make certain changes.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I just thought that they watered down the feminist aspect in the movie.
But as for her being attractive, I really like Jodie Foster in this role. Originally, it was supposed to be Michelle Pfeiffer.
And then Meg Ryan was even considered.
And yeah, not appropriate.
Yeah, no. Nope.
So quality of actress trumps maybe appearance.
Sure, but they could have, yes, they made choices.
Yeah,
that's fine. I have another theme of, you were talking about the horror, so we can talk about that. Some definite horror movie trope stuff happening. We have some pretty major misdirects where they're coming into the house to do the big rescue. They're getting ready to pound down the doors, and the bad guy's in his house, and there's a knock at the door, and you think, oh, but it's obviously not the FBI. They've got the wrong house, and oh, but there's, Clarice, and I think partly one of my problems is that this movie suffers from the fact that it's old because it was the foundation for so many things that came after it. So if you've seen the things that came after it, you look at this and you're like, okay, that's kind of lame and dated, but you have to remember that it was the beginning of all that. So Hannibal Lecter, okay.
It is the joke of somebody who reads Shakespeare for the first time starts complaining, there's so many cliches.
Right. So he does feel very cliched and theatrical and overdone to me, and part of that is because I have seen the things that he inspired. I will say the idea of the FBI or some organization, trying to capture a bad guy by using another bad guy, and then getting too close to that second bad guy and being manipulated by the second bad guy is both fun and also very tired at this point in 2019. So I will also say that, did you ever watch The Blacklist?
No.
Okay, so James Spader is amazing. He is so charismatic, and he's not a serial killer Hannibal Lecter person, but he is this highly intelligent crime boss, major crime dude, right? And the same thing, that the whole thing starts off he's in this cage and he will only talk to this one brunette, female, very young FBI agent. And she comes in, he gives her a little bit of information. She goes off and investigates. He gives her a little bit more. It's this whole cat and mouse thing that totally is mirrored and because of this kind of stuff. But James Spader is so much more charismatic. He can talk about anything and you cannot look away. I felt like this movie, Hannibal Lecter, was creepy, but a lot of it had to do with the lighting and kind of what he was saying. It wasn't as... and it was just so theatrical, especially the part at the end where he's in the cage and the lighting's all dark and he's looking up and you're like, okay, we get it, you're creepy. Oh, yes, there you are, being creepy.
Okay, the film is 30 years old.
Yeah.
And it's not fair to compare it to the stuff that comes after. It was innovative for the time, and you can make better films once you have that as a template, but to be the originator. If you look at Neuromancer, it's kind of hard to get through because the guy has some creative ideas, but he doesn't quite know how to write them very well. And then you have other people go, oh yeah, this is a great idea, and they do it better. But you had to have the originator in the beginning, so...
Yes, giving full credit to the movie for doing all of that and setting all that into motion. Personal enjoyment factor. I thought Hannibal was scarier in the book than the movie because we didn't have the lighting trick and this thing and Anthony Hopkins, and then and because it's now pop culture, I had him with the nice Chianti, or whatever the heck it is. That's so much part of pop culture, and it's almost so jokey now that I feel like it really diminishes some of the scariness of it. Does that make sense? But I could see how at the time this would be terrifying and super, super scary. So yes, but do you want to talk more about the horror ideas or tropes or motifs of it being a horror movie? You seem to like horror more than I do.
I don't like horror. I really don't.
Horror. Why do we keep watching horror things?
So originally in the book, it wasn't Chianti, it was Amarone, because that actually pairs well with liver. So there's, if you're talking about James Spader, if he could talk to you about anything, well, the book Lecter was a little bit more of that. And they cut down his scenes quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that's really... the shining part of both the book and the movie are those scenes between Hector and Clarice.
Now, see, I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay, so what were the shining parts?
Well, I don't think any of it was shiny. That's not a word I would use to describe. There were very compelling scenes in this, though. I thought the scene where she was doing the autopsy, where she basically shooed all the men out of the room, and both the book and the movie, and in the book, she made it clear, in the movie it was not as clear. She chose to lean into her accent to remind all of these men of their mothers and the church ladies and their grandmas and be like, y'all, you've done your part, now let me do mine, and like shoot them out of the room to give this poor victim some dignity. Like, that was a really good scene in both the book and the movie. But better in the book.
Well, it's more subtle in the movie, because you do hear her accent come out, and she's like, well, come on, man. But it's subtle, because we're not in her head. We can't see the thought process going on.
Yes. So, but that was a scene that I found very compelling and enjoyed. In the book, it was a little long, but the scene of her trying to get into the storage facility and then get into the car, and then there were knees suddenly, and then okay, it's a mannequin, it's a head in a jar, and again we're not in her head, but she's aware that she's putting herself in this dangerous situation, so she bluffs the guy who's out there who owns the storage. She's like, the other cops know I'm here, if this door comes down, blah blah blah, all of this stuff as she's worming in and dealing with the mice, and like we're seeing her deal with her fears and stuff. So I thought that was a very compelling scene. I mean, yeah, the scenes with Lecter were fine, and they were definitely part of it. The scenes that stayed with me, that were the scary scenes, were the scenes between Bill, James, and the victim, and in his thought process, because again, in the movie, we don't get very much of Buffalo Bill / James Gumb. We get very few scenes of him. In the book, we get in his brain, we get his whole thought process, we get the ideas of what he's doing and his stuff with the dog and his watching these videotapes and a lot of his internal thoughts, which are terrifying to me. It's scarier for me when an author is writing from the point of view of somebody so deranged, because you're unwittingly or wittingly, I suppose, because you're choosing to read this book, you're in their head. And I don't like living in the heads of bad people. We're never really in Lecter's head, except where he's having his big rumination, which, let me tell you, was dumb. Okay. I'm going to skip a little bit, but I have a couple major problems with this book too, even though I liked it, but he didn't use his brains. He's supposed to be so smart and so amazing, and he basically has a memory palace where he just remembers everything, which is great, that's cool, but like, he didn't solve anything. He remembered that he already knew about this guy.
Yeah, he's playing people. He wants to seem like the prophetic genius, and he really isn't. He's much more normal.
Yeah, but even then, he doesn't want to give them all the answers. Like, he could have just said, it's this guy, and I'm awesome. But no, he's like, I'm going to give you this, because he wants his own thing. He wants to escape and blah, blah, blah. But it's not like he called at the end after he escaped and was like, by the way, here's the real guy. Like, he just wants to watch the world burn. Like, that's fine. And I don't particularly like living in his head either, but okay, whatever. So
this kind of makes me think of Jaws, where the less you see of the monster, the more scary it is. If we hadn't had that scene in Hannibal Lecter's head, Hannibal Lecter would have been more intimidating, but then you see it, and it's not the buildup that you see from the outside.
Yeah. And then we got too many serial killers. It's this serial killer who knows this serial killer who once slept with this serial killer, and then
that was really convoluted.
Very convoluted. So I'm glad that they cut a lot of that out of the movie. That was a good choice there. The moth thing, I did not seem like it really made sense with James Gumb's personality. He's this kind of character. He's obsessed. He covets. He's unhappy. He hates himself. Blah, blah, blah. I get that the symbolism of the moth, the chrysalis, and then you emerge and you're different and all of that stuff. But it just seemed maybe too cerebral for this James Gumb person.
Yeah, he's much more instinctual, it felt like.
Yeah, and that he had the epiphany because he had a suitcase with moths in it. So there were definitely things about this book that I didn't get or didn't feel like were the greatest flow. They fixed a lot of that with the movie, but then they kind of leaned into it a little bit too much, I felt, in some ways of the movie.
Well, Gumb and Hector are supposed to be the opposites of those spectrums, where you have somebody who's very plan-oriented and very meticulous, and then you have Gumb, who is the exact opposite, who wants to live in these bodies, and he's really gross in a lot of ways, and he isn't the thinker.
Right. Yeah. So
that kind of...
Except that, he thought enough to vary the places of dumping and stuff. I don't know, man. Okay. whatever. So anything else you want to say about horror? I guess we kind of got off topic there. But here's a theme, I thought. So about the ends justifying the means. So would they have found Bill or Gum without Lecter, do you think?
Eventually, they probably would have. Lecter speeded up the process. Because Clarice is putting together those clues.
Right, but they wouldn't have... If she's only there because they decided to get Lecter involved.
Yes.
Right? So if they had not gone down the Lecter road and they hadn't brought her in...
They would have solved it eventually.
Right. So I see what you're saying about Lecter sped it up, but I think Clarice really helped speed it up too. And so they're kind of part and parcel together. Even after Lecter has killed more people in his escape from custody, okay. And Clarice still believes that she was on the right track by getting his help. She heeds his advice. She finds the vital clue, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, it was really Chilton who messed up with Lecter.
Yes, that's definitely. So, I mean, we've had this theme before about how the bureaucracy can, mess up the best laid plans or, petty bureaucrats, because that's what Chilton basically is. Okay, so here, the idea of progress and goals. So, again, in the book, it's a big deal that she's a student, and if she misses too much class and finals and tests, she can get recycled and basically go back into, limbo and not be able to finish her training and become a special agent, FBI agent.
You should have to wait for another opening.
Right. And in the movie, they didn't really have that. So she didn't have as much at stake by being a part of this investigation. In the book, she had to make a choice to continue investigating or to take care of herself, and she chose to do the investigation. It worked out well for her because she helped.
It shows a service personality.
Yes. Again, the book, I think, did a better job of that.
I wonder if it's, again, kind of distracting from the main plot, and it's another side thing that had to be taken out.
Yeah, but I think that it really informed her character. And I think that it has its levels. Because, so every waking moment of her is about getting rid of the serial killers. And, she's, at the beginning of the movie, she's running an obstacle. At the beginning of the
that's actually
too,
in
right?
Quantico. So the sign that they have up, that's the actual sign that they have in FBI's Quantico training.
Oh.
And the first guy she meets is an FBI agent in real life.
Oh, well. Neat. So she's running an obstacle course, but she's alone. She's constantly moving. She can't sleep. It's this reoccurring thing. And the fact that she does get to sleep at the end is important. That has her character gets to have this growth and change. In the movie, because we don't have that, and at the end, too, she's not resting at the end. She's going, Dr. Lecter, Dr. Lecter, Dr. Lecter, and she's freaking out on the phone. And so the endings are very different for Clarice. She gets her happy ending in the book. She doesn't get it in the movie, but she gets it by, going through all of these trials and tribulations and making choices and suffering and sacrificing. And in the movie, she has, an adventure and her life is definitely in danger and it's very scary and it's not over yet. So they're just two very different ideas of her story.
Well, okay, so do you think a hero is somebody who is created or a hero is somebody who was always the hero but has to discover that about their nature?
I think it can be either. Or
so,
both.
That's when I was reading interviews about this from Jodie Foster's perspective. Clarice is always the hero, and that's informed by how she reacts on the ranch. She has to save these creatures, and they're destined to die. There's no way that she can really help them, but she has to do that. At the end, when she does get to finally sleep, it's noted that that is a temporary reprieve. She has to keep going because the Silence of the Lambs, it's not a forever state. It's a temporary state.
Yeah, but she does get to rest. And the last line of the book is that she's asleep, and she hasn't been sleeping most of the book. She's been so driven. But she's not the only person with this progress and thing. Lecter's progress and goal is to escape. So he does all of these things to get there. And Buffalo Bill's whole progress or his whole goal is to become something else and to, complete his masterpiece or whatever. And even Crawford is I felt like he was trying to atone and trying to make the world a better place. And Crawford
I find more problematic. because he is putting a trainee in danger. And you see him as a father figure, and yes, he does try to be that, but he also doesn't want to go near Lecter.
Well, because Lecter, he already has a relationship with Lecter because of the first book.
Yes.
And, right? So when we cut that out of the movie, then we don't get to reference it. But in the book, because they had a relationship, he couldn't go to Lecter. That wasn't an option for him.
Okay. I'll grant that. I
mean, it's interesting that he picked her, and, they talk about how, like, she made a good impression on him earlier.
Yeah, he is trying to mentor her in a lot of scenes.
Right. And again, because in the book, we have more about his relationship with William Graham and all of these other, a whole other story. Because this is the second in a series, but the movie was really filmed and shot and presented as the first in a series, as opposed to being the second in a series. And I think that definitely changes the ideas of our goals and whatnot. But I thought you're talking about a hero journey. We often have our protagonist and our antagonist, and we don't often give a lot of screen and word time to the middleman. And Lecter's a middleman. He's not our protagonist. He's not our antagonist. I mean, he's going to be the antagonist, obviously, of the next one when they're all out there trying to find him or whatever.
Yeah, so when we talk about journeys, Lecter doesn't change. And that's what's fascinating to me about Clarice and Gum. Gum doesn't get much screen time, and that's deliberate in a lot of ways because you don't want to make a serial killer glamorous. Mm-hmm. That's problematic. But they're both transforming. Clarice isn't as, I guess, consciously wanting to transform. It's just the journey that she accepts because that's her personality.
She's getting harder and getting more experience, etc.
So she's going through it deliberately in one way. Gum is doing this really evil way, and so I think they make really interesting foils just on that. And then, the person who doesn't change is Lecter.
Yeah, the middleman. Yeah, which is interesting. It's an interesting choice, both the author and director.
I thought this is kind of fascinating. Hopkins said that when he was thinking of Lecter's personality and how to present him, it was a combination of Hal 9000, Katharine Hepburn, and Truman Capote. After he said that, I could kind of see Katharine Hepburn in there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What I found interesting is that they stepped up a lot of stuff. They leaned into a lot of the theatrical aspects of Lecter in the movie, but they also downplayed it. In the book, he has red eyes and 6 fingers on one hand.
Yes. He's much more freakish.
But, yeah, in the movie, so, I mean, okay, that was an interesting change. We tone him down and ramp him up in a different way. Maybe to make him less cartoony? I'm not sure. Like, it's scarier if he looks like somebody who could just be anybody that you'd walk through, by in the grocery store. If I walked by somebody in the grocery store with red eyes and 6 fingers, I'd probably remember them.
The 6-fingered man.
Yeah, exactly. You killed my former patient's lover friend with his moths.
Yeah, so the journey when we first see Lecter, it's basically down into the id. It's straight down there.
Yeah.
So the first time I read this book, it's really gross. You have this one guy who just wants to talk about poop. And he's just getting under Clarice's skin. Then the scene where she gets the semen thrown in her face happens before she meets Lecter. So it's just this continued...
No. First he whispers, "I can smell your cunt." Then she talks to Lecter. Then she walks out. And while she was talking to Lecter, he was jacking off and flicks it at her face. So she's met Lecter. Yes.
Okay, but the first time I read it, it was this really grim, dark, just deepening into the id of all this gross stuff. And then as I read it so many years later, having more experience of the world, I just go, fucking creepers. Because you get inundated with this stuff. It's just creepers everywhere.
Yes.
Sometimes in the most unexpected ways. But that's one of the things I find interesting about Lecter, is if you look at it from like the id and the superego, how you are deepening into this id, and that's what he is. He's this superego as well as being this very base instinctual character.
So I have like 2 main things left. I have my LGBT stuff.
Yes.
And then I've got like what worked for me and what didn't, and then like kind of my end thoughts. So I don't have too much more to say. Do you want to talk about the LGBT stuff?
Yeah, that's an important thing. And at the time this movie came out, there were trans groups saying this is really messed up. You're making another trans character be the bad guy. You know, they're always a creepy one. And so Denny tried to defend this and saying, well, she's got that one line, well, you know, trans people are very passive. This can't be a real trans person. But that doesn't translate when you have most of the film being taken up by what is perceived by a trans person.
So I have a thing I want to read about this, because I thought I put it really well. So Harris, the author of the book, took great pains to differentiate between real transgendered people and Buffalo Bill. The point is initially made by Hannibal, who suggests that Gum is only not a transsexual, he just believes that he is a transsexual. And Starling says that line about there's no correlation that between transsexualism and violence. Transsexuals are passive types, usually, which anytime you paint with a broad brush, you're going to be wrong. So we understand that. Yeah. Also, transsexual is not a term we use anymore. Again, 1988. Furthermore, during Crawford's attempts to obtain medical records from Dr. Danielson, head of the Gender Identity Clinic at Johns Hopkins, to see if the killer might have applied for gender reassignment surgery but been denied, the aforementioned Danielson has this to say. This part was not in the movie, but it really should have been, because it would have answered a lot of these complaints. But the doctor says, to even mention Buffalo Bill in the same breath with the same problems that we treat here is ignorant and unfair and dangerous. Mr. Crawford, it makes my hair stand on end. It's taken years. We're not through yet showing the public that transsexuals aren't crazy. They aren't perverts. The incidence of violence among transsexuals is a lot lower than the general population. These are decent people with a real problem. They deserve help, and we can give it. I'm not having a witch hunt here. Finally, Harris reveals that Gum's desire isn't to become a woman in general, but rather one specific woman, his biological mother, who died when he was a child. And even then, it's an idealized, glamorous version of a mother in his fantasy. Other than the initial suggestion that Gum has co-opted transsexualism and Starling's insistence that transgendered people are passive types, none of the above stuff, none of that content, made the cut for Deme. Is that how you're saying his name?
Yeah.
Cut for Deme and the company's film adaptation. No impassioned speech from the Johns Hopkins daughter. No revelation that Gum's insanity is rooted in a larger identity problems not specific to gender. Moreover, neither Harris's novel nor the movie feature positive queer characters to even balance the scales. So it's understandable why the film in particular received so much criticism from the gay and transgender communities. They go on. The narrative suffers from an error in omission rather than intent, as indicated by Jonathan Deme's reaction in utter horror of his mistake. He was so taken aback by these criticisms that he chose Philadelphia, about a man's civil suit against his former employees who fired him because he was gay and had contracted AIDS, as his next project. Deme also said in a recent interview with the Huffington Post that he applauded the voices from the queer community taking his film to task. When you know better, you do better, for sure. So, yeah.
That's a great scene in the book, and I wish it had made it into the movie just for that reason, and I'm glad that he, as a director, learned.
Acknowledged and learned.
Yeah,
for sure. But again, the novel was, I said before, feminist. The movie, not quite as, even though, it was still trying, just it wasn't quite as feminist as the novel, which is fine. Not every novel and book has to be feminist. But especially when you have one that's literally about the carving up the skins of women, it's nice that we had a female protagonist who was fighting against that. It would be very easy for this just to be, men killing women, men rescuing women, women are just the plot devices and
that's
things.
Why I think that the victim who's in the...
Catherine in the well?
Yeah, so Catherine in the well, she is a much more interesting character than at first blush.
Yes, and she tries to escape and has a very clever little plan of how to do it to get the little yappy, much-loved dog.
She actually keeps the dog in the end.
Yes, she does.
Which is kind of cute. And the dog didn't have a broken leg. It was just, she was holding it and
pretending and threatening it and all this stuff to send him over the edge. So, yeah.
So at the time, and again, this is 30 years ago, victims were not presented. I don't want to call her a victim because in some ways, she's stuck in a very terrible situation, but she does everything she can.
She's still a victim. She was literally kidnapped and drugged and starved. She's a victim.
Okay, so I guess...
She was victimized?
Okay, because victim can be a loaded term. It's one of those terms that has become a bit problematic, and it depends on in what context that you're using it.
Sure, but Catherine's not here to say I don't consider myself a victim. In this novel, she was painted as a victim. She was victimized. She was the woman in peril.
Yeah, she's the damsel in distress, but she's not just sitting in the castle. She's damsel in distress who's trying to fight the dragon as much as she can in that situation.
And, is the one who eventually gets rescued. Had a plan and, was...
And the senator is also an interesting character. She does try to humanize her daughter. She does do this thing where she tries to talk to the serial killer. And there's no sense that he ever saw that. And so all this stuff that she was putting out in the world didn't work. And also how she has to deal with Lecter.
Yeah.
And she catches on to Chilton. In the book, she has this terrifying moment where Chilton's trying to show off Lecter like he's a carnival barker. And she's just like, oh, God, what have I gotten myself into? This guy's an idiot.
Right. Yeah, again, we've got, and I know Lecter's thing isn't, Lecter is all about the mind games and tormenting anybody. It's not that he's specifically tormenting women, but what we see is we see him messing with her brain and enjoying her anguish, talking about her daughter. We see that he talked the other guy into committing suicide. So he definitely, it's not a gender push for who he's victimizing, but we do see it with the senator, and he seems to take this very, very and the way that he bothers her is tied to her gender because he brings up breastfeeding. So if it was a father standing there, he would have had to come up with something else that probably wouldn't have been as quite so body
intimate.
Yeah,
Yeah, he does get pretty gross. So what do you think about his last line? Love your suit. It's just more mind games?
He's a dude who's fucking with a woman's head. She's a woman in power. Of course she has to wear a suit, and of course her things matter. One of the first things he says to Clarice is, you with your good purse and your cheap shoes, or your cheap shoes and your good purse bag, or whatever. So this is how men relate to women. We talk about their bodies with their breastfeeding and, whatever, and their cunts when he talks to Clarice. That's one of the first things he says to her, too. And... and we lord our dominance over them, and we put them in their little boxes. We refer to their outfits. Yeah, it's exact. He's part of this misogynistic crap that Clarice is fighting against. I love that the woman was a senator, though, that the senator was a woman. Like that. Like I said, the novel has a lot of feminism in it.
But that's one of those lines that there's a reason people like Hannibal Lecter. And that's one of those lines where he has that sense of humor where he does push people's buttons, but there's that sense that he's above it. And that's why he can do this sort of stuff. Chilton tries to get under his skin in the same way. He says, well, you're just going to go to prison and you're going to be raped by all these other prisoners and that's going to be your life. But that does not get to Lecter.
Yeah. Can we go back to what you said? People like Hannibal Lecter because
they do.
No, hold on.
Yeah.
You said people like Hannibal Lecter because he's above it all?
Not that he's above it all, but he is a charismatic, evil character.
Yeah.
People like intelligence. They like that he has that kind of sense of humor in a way.
Yes, I too enjoy when men use their senses of humor to be domineering and assholes to people. I love it when... Okay, sorry, I'll edit it
you don't
out.
have to love it. I'm just saying he's a very popular character, and I'm exploring why that is.
That disturbs me.
That he's a popular character?
If he's a popular character because people like his sense of humor, yeah, that disturbs me. Because, ew.
Well, it's not just his humor. It's that he does present himself as a very intelligent character. We don't have that internal monologue where he's in his memory palace, as you call it.
Right.
And so we don't have to deal with, okay, maybe he is a letdown. It is the Jaws moment of we don't see everything that's Lecter. We just see from the outside. And from the outside, he's cultured, he's intelligent, and there is a charisma about him.
Sure.
And if you treat him like a human, he and Barney have an interesting relationship as well, because Barney treats him well.
In the book is his guard who treats him well, and yes, he's nice to Barney. The guards at the end were the ones he killed. Mm-hmm. Because they didn't treat him like a human, that's why he killed them? No, it was an opportunistic thing. If he had the chance to kill Barney to get out, I think he would have done the same thing.
There seems to be that respect of civility.
Ugh, no.
So I don't think Barney would have gotten off, but because Barney treated him like a human, and that's what Hannibal Lecter wants, is...
to be treated like a human.
Yeah.
No, I think Hannibal Lecter wants to be worshipped as God. I think the reason why he tells Clarice in the book that he's going to leave her alone is because he likes knowing that she's out there. He likes to watch the world burn, and he wants her to maybe there'll be some other serial killer who he happened to know based on somebody at 6 degrees of separation, Hannibal Lecter, and he can play this game with her again in the future. He is all about the mind games, like you said, and in the book, he threatens Chilton at the end. He's like, I'll see him real soon, in his little letters and stuff. Will he? I don't know. Because Chilton is a bug. He may or may not go after him, but Chilton's going to live in fear. That's almost worse. Like, never being able to relax. In the movie, he's going to kill him, like, pretty soon. We see him following him along. So we know that that's going to happen, right? Which is less creepy. Yes, he is a charismatic character. Kind of. Sure. I don't think that I would say he has a sense of humor. I'm not sure. Because he said nice suit, because he was mocking and being rude, that to me doesn't count as a sense of humor. That's just a dick move. So I can't think of any other jokes that he tells. I can think of when he's being intentionally gross to be gross, and intentionally creepy to be creepy, intentionally poking your buttons to intentionally poke your buttons, but I don't see any of that as being funny. I mean, he's amusing to himself.
I'm not saying that it's just the sense of humor. It's that he presents himself as a very cultured, very intelligent person, and very controlled in a lot of ways.
Sure,
And that's what makes him sort of fascinating.
Oh, okay.
You know, you have Gum, who's just an animal. You have Briggs, who's just there to be a gross sort of killer that's in the other cell. There's nothing of interest to them. You have Chilton, who is supposed to be this kind of character where he is educated, and yet he's a fool. He's a total fool who gets played very easily.
Yeah. Well, and obviously a lot of people agree with you, and they made more movies about Hannibal Lecter.
And those movies fail epically.
So maybe he's better as the middleman.
Well, the thing that makes this film interesting is the gore really isn't... It's not about the gore. There's a couple scenes here and there to make a point, but that's not the point of the film. Whereas in Red Dragon, it is about sort of the gross.
Yeah, but, you know... I did think it was interesting that, so they save all the gore for Hannibal, basically, at the end. He's the goriest, bloodiest scene. And in the movie, they made it even more bloody and gory by hanging the body up. In the book, he didn't hang the body up on the cage. He just left one down here and one in the elevator shaft, and, you know, them pretended to be there, whatever.
So I can tell you're not that impressed with some of the movie gimmicks. I found the subtleties in the film interesting, and it's one of those films that I can watch over, and when I'm not distracted as much by the story because I know the story, there's more things that you pick up. So when she does go down, I know, like, there's just that red. Everyone's in red. That's an interesting choice as far as film and coloration and how you want to frame something. There are submarine sounds when she's there. And again, it's that sort of...
Say the there. When she goes... Because we were talking about the courthouse, and you're not talking about the courthouse. I'm
talking about when she first meets Lecter.
Okay.
So when she's at the asylum, there are submarine sounds that play while she's down there. So these are kind of the subtle things to add the creepiness. When they take out the pupa from the woman's throat in the autopsy, there's a sigh that can be very telling. I find that sort of interesting symbolically. You know, there's gas that builds up, and so when you do, like, unchoke the throat, there would be sort of this gas release. But it's also that idea of the dead speaking, and that's what they're trying to do with an autopsy. It's trying to find out what the dead would say. Mm-hmm. So I find that symbolically interesting.
Cool. I'm still stuck on you saying when I watch this and I can watch it again and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, I will never watch this movie again. You cannot pay me. I felt like I needed to bleach my eyes. I've had nightmares. I'm not okay. I'm going to edit this when we're done. And then I'm going to purposely not think about this book or movie for as long as possible, because I had a nightmare about my cat eating my face the other night, coupled with sleep paralysis. Wow. Not a good place for me. I'm just saying, I don't like living in bad, evil people's heads. And I did not, I feel like you could get, in fact, here, I will tell you, here are my I am reading this verbatim off of another website because I thought it just summed out exactly what I was feeling so well, and I'm going to link to it on our blog. But there's no doubt that this is a great movie, a timeless classic that will never get old for some people. You know that this is a good movie because the critics don't want to admit it. It's a horror film. That being said, all that is great about the film, minus the performances, is in the book, with an added layer of depth, and the movie just isn't able to muster in a reasonable runtime. And yet, it's an incredible, quick, and easy read. As great as this movie is, the book is so and more. So if the subject matter and all of that stuff sounds like something you want to do the book. Do yourself a favor and do the book. And then, sure, watch the thing so you can get all the pop culture Chianti references and whatnot, but that would be my thought. I'm done, and I don't want to read any more of
I
them.
feel like we're being Siskel and Ebert. So they famously had a fight over this. Ebert liked it, Siskel hated it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh. So your final thoughts?
It kind of, I don't know, you're reminding me of Scott Glenn, who plays Jack Crawford. So Scott Glenn, I was talking to John Douglas, who was the person he's portraying in this. Douglas was kind of irritated with him because he's this liberal and he didn't believe in the death penalty, and that bothered Douglas. And so he made him listen to a tape of these two killers rape and torture these girls, and they would do this once a year. And according to Douglas, Glenn listened to about a minute of this and he was in tears. And after that, he was for the death penalty, and he had huge issues. So it sounds a lot like what you're going through of this kind of dark movie. Just he couldn't get past it.
Yeah, I don't like living there.
Yeah. Personally, I was really fascinated by this for a while, just from a profiling perspective. And so I read a couple of John Douglas's books at the time. So yeah, different reaction.
So there you go. I had some trivia points. Do you want to hear my little trivia points?
Sure.
Let's see here. It was the third film in Oscar history to win 5 Academy Awards. The Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay. Oh yeah, okay, here. This is a fun little piece of trivia. The guy who plays Buffalo Bill / James Gumb was Stottlemyre on Monk. Captain Stottlemyre, Captain Mustache on Monk.
I would have never placed him.
Nope. Majorly brain trippy. Okay.
So his dance scene was not scripted, and he apparently had to drink a lot of tequila before he got up the nerve to do that.
Yeah. He's also, Bill / James is based on the real-life sexual psychopath Edward Gein, who was also classified as schizophrenic. During the 1950s, he gained notoriety as one of the most famous combinations of necrophilia, transvestitism, and fetishism. With the exception of necrophilia, James Gumb had an almost identical psychological makeup.
So I've heard various reports from Thomas Harris that he based it on 3 different serial killers, and that he didn't base it on anybody in particular, that he talked with John Douglas and just sort of amalgamated what serial killers do.
Great. So then there just happened to be one just like him in the 50s. So
well,
that's comforting.
There's Ted Bundy, who used the arm cast. There's Gary Henrik, and he's the one who kept women in a well. And then there's Ed Gein.
Yay.
So other people might find this more fascinating.
Yes. This part of the podcast is for you, people who listen to true crime dramas and stuff and murder mysteries. I know you're out there. Robin, you like watching things about people dying and stuff?
I don't know how true this is. This is one of the things I passed along. Lecter could be treated with drugs. I'm probably going to get this messed up because I don't know drugs names very well. Monoamine oxidase. It's an MAOI. And those drugs, the 3 things that you're not supposed to have are liver, fava beans, and wine. So it's a little psychological joke.
Oh.
Yeah, funny.
Okay. So that was my final thought. If it's your thing, cool. And if you liked the movie, you probably liked the book because it did a better job of all the things that the movie tried to do.
The thing that distracted me in the book is the tense changing. Every once in a while I go to present tense, and that took me out of it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the book wasn't perfect. One of the things that bothered me in the book was that it was very aged in terms of the technology. So it's like, oh, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. And I learned a lot about FBI procedurals that I just don't care. But and this is fair. If the book was written today and it was FBI procedures now, I'd be like, oh, that's kind of interesting that this is what the FBI does. But I'm like, I know that this is the late 80s. I know that none of this is relevant anymore. And I'm not super interested in the history of the FBI in that term. So, like, it just didn't resonate with me. There was a lot of that, and now I'm flying over here, and now I'm walking over here, and now I'm filing this report, and now I'm calling this person, and now I'm writing down this note, and now I'm blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my God, I get it. You're being a very good FBI person. Good for you.
The thing that disappointed me when I first read it was how basic the prose was. And so that kind of bothered me. I was expecting something a little bit more elevated.
Right. And I think at one point I had the book open, so you have 2 pages, right? And Starling. I'm like, by Thomas Harris, a pronoun. Because seriously, he was like allergic to using the pronoun. I don't know what the problem was, but Starling walked, and then Starling opened the door. Starling looked in the room, and Starling saw that there was a table, and I was like, oh my God. Okay. So, yeah. Simplistic prose. And
I wonder how much of that is trying to get into police procedurals, because you do have to have this certain kind of language that you use. But from a novel standpoint, it doesn't work very well.
Yeah, for sure.
But again, you've made this point. I just want to reiterate, it's a little unfair to judge something that is that old.
And you've made that point too. So,
okay. I don't know. I don't have any further
Was it worth
thoughts.
your time?
Okay, so I don't have the same aversion to horror. I don't like torture porn. I can't stand the Saw movies. I can't stand the Hostel films. It has to be a really good horror film for me to like it. But there are horror films that I've liked in the past. So for me, this was a lot more interesting because there are serial killers, or this does actually happen. And I can understand where that's even more terrifying for some people, and they don't want to be in that because it is real. But for me, that's what makes it interesting, is that this was something that could be real.
So was it worth your time?
Yes.
Okay.
It is a very well-made film. The book is kind of meh. You'll get a little bit more out of the film having read the book, but the book is meh.
Okay. Feel free to send us an email at pagesandpopcornpodcast@gmail.com with your own opinions and take part in our poll. We will have a poll up about this movie. And we'll see you all next time when we will read something hopefully a little bit lighter. And now, a little behind the scenes extra just for you. If Lecter reveals Buffalo Bill's true identity to Chilton... Yeah. Oh my God. Hey! Sorry. What the fuck? Oh my God!
Yeah, there's vomit.
Oh my God!
It's a lot of it, too.
Oh, windowsill! Why?
Because it's a cat.
No, but the last time she was sick, it was because she was eating rubber bands, and there's no...
Oh my God. Do you want me to clean this?
No.
You kind of do.
No. Oh my God, is she done?
Yes.
Here, there's five more. Minka.
How did you survive with a baby?
Diapers contain the mess.
Yeah, I thought, the poopy part was the one thing that you couldn't handle. Ugh. Oh my God. We apologize for this interruption by Mika.
You know what? Maybe Minka just had an opinion about the book and movie, and that was her opinion. She threw it practically on your head. You know?
It's just she had such a strong reaction to it. It's just... That was a whole stomach's worth.
Okay. So,